We can go live around 4:50, 7:58. We'll start admitting other people in.
सुकृत मेरा वो presentation मिल गया था ना?
हाँ जी. Sir, but you will only be presenting, no?
हाँ ठीक है, I'll only present.
ठीक है.
Just in case there's a problem. Yeah.
हाँ जी. I have your presentation.
Ranit, you're not coming to Kutch soon now, it looks like.
Sandeep bhai, because of this case here, and it seems that there are a lot of restrictions. We were planning to at least start some field work, but
shall we start admitting people in 4:57?
Yes,
Let me go live first. Please wait for 1 minute.
Okay.
but I hope everything is fine in Kutch.
You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, everything is good. Everything is good.
Mm-hmm. I was reading today about this villages who have kind of successfully prevented COVID to penetrate into their kind of boundaries, and especially this village in Bhuj.
Yeah, the villages are being very strict actually, much more than we are. They refuse many of our organizational people to come in. They said that online हमारे साथ बात करिए.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I also read that of those 2 cases in Gujarat.
We are live now.
Okay.
We are live now.
Yes. Hello, Shalini.
I think we'll start now.
Yes, Shukri.
Okay. A very good evening to one and all. I am Sukrit Sen, a member of the Council of Monuments and Sites India and the East Zone representative for the Emerging Professionals Working Group. I welcome you to the 4th and our last session of the webinar series, which focuses on resilience to disaster, pandemic, and climate change in historic precincts and areas. For those who are new to ICOMOS, we represent the India chapter of the International Council of Monuments and Sites, a unique and expansive global network working towards promoting the application of theory, methodology, and scientific techniques to the conservation of cultural heritage places with the underlying value of uniting around heritage. Our membership is broad-based and interdisciplinary through thus providing a forum where individuals and representatives of institutions concerned with the conservation, protection, rehabilitation, and enhancement of cultural heritage sites can meet to exchange information and views on principles and practices in the field. East Zone ICOMOS India and NSC HTV ICOMOS India, with support from the Emerging Professionals Working Group, have been hosting a series of webinars on resilient and sustainable development of historic precincts and areas with focus on West Bengal. And today, as we know that historic precincts in urban areas are becoming increasingly vulnerable to natural as well as human-induced hazards. In the absence of any comprehensive legal framework for protection, these precincts are vulnerable not only to impending disasters, but also during emergency and post-disaster recovery phases. The major underlying causes for their increasing vulnerability, apart from their age, is population growth, urbanization, poverty, etc., especially in developing countries, and they often fall prey to the impacts of different hazards. Often at times, traditional communities in such historic cities develop different practices towards the prevention and mitigation, uh, emergency response and recovery. In this webinar, we will try to highlight and describe such systems through various examples and try to find a way forward, keeping in mind the different challenges and priorities for disaster risk reduction of historic urban areas by raising awareness among all involved stakeholders. Without further ado, I will straight away move to our keynote speaker for the day, Dr. Rohit Jigyasu, who is the Project Manager, Urban Heritage, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Program Unit at the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property, ICROM. Dr. Jigyasu is a conservation architect and a risk management professional from India, currently working at ICROM as project manager. Dr. Jigyasu served as UNESCO Chairholder Professor at the Institute of Disaster Mitigation of Urban Cultural Heritage at Ritsumeikan University, Kyoto, Japan, where he was instrumental in developing and teaching international training course on disaster risk management of cultural heritage. He was elected president of ICOMOS India from 2014 to 2018 and president of ICOMOS International Scientific Committee on Risk Preparedness, ICORP, from 2010 to 2019. Dr. Jigyasu has been the elected member of the Executive Committee of ICOMOS since 2011 and just finished his term as Vice President for the period 2017 to 2020. Before joining ICROM, Dr. Jigyasu has been working with several national and international organizations such as UNESCO, UNISDR, Getty Conservation Institute, and World Bank for consultancy, research, and training on disaster risk management of cultural heritage. He's been a mentor to many in the field, and we are very excited to listen to your presentation titled Towards Transformative Adaptation for Building Resilience of Historic Cities, Challenges and Initiatives. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for your generous introduction, Sukrit. So I will straight away share my screen. First of all, thank you everyone, especially the organizers. And I'm really happy that I know I can see a lot of my friends here. Even my teachers are here. I can see Professor Ravindran here. So I'm very, very happy to be speaking to all of you. It's indeed a privilege. Let me share the screen. Just a second. Okay, just to confirm if you are able to see the screen.
We can see your screen, sir.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I kind of made my title a bit more simpler because even if I talk about transformative change, I thought it would be much better that I speak in more plain language and then probably explain at the end what I mean by transformative change for historic cities. Well, when we talk about historic cities and their vulnerability to disasters, we know that we have many, many examples where urban heritage or historic cities have been exposed to disasters, leading to many kinds of damages. And I show you a couple of examples now, starting from a central Mexico earthquake in 2017, where a large part of the historic neighborhood and cathedrals in the central Mexico, especially in Mexico City, were badly damaged due to earthquake. In our neighborhood, we had experienced a major earthquake in Nepal, where Kathmandu Valley and its major historic settlements were impacted very heavily due to the earthquakes in 2015. And in our own country, in India, in 2001, we had Gujarat earthquake, and for the first time, we were confronted with a huge challenge of urban recovery because of the damages to historic settlements such as Bhuj and Anjar and so on and so forth. So not only earthquakes, our historic cities are also vulnerable to other kind of disasters. For example, fire. And here I just show you an example from Lijiang, which is a World Heritage town in China, and has been confronted with 4 incidents of fire in 2013 and 14, leading to a huge damage in the historic neighborhood of Lijiang. So now coming to our own country, you keep on hearing about the news of one or the other fire incident affecting our cities. And this is just one of the example from Chandni Chowk in Old Delhi, where a fire in 2014 destroyed quite a bit of historic buildings, historic houses in the old part of the city. There are also incidents where museums have been affected, the ones which are located in urban areas. And in Delhi in 2016, there was a huge fire in the National Museum of Natural History, and a significant proportion of collection in the museum, which was mainly organic collection, got completely damaged. From earthquakes, fires to floods. And what we see now, what we find now is urban flooding, a very regular phenomena. And especially historic parts of cities are much more vulnerable to floods. There are a couple of examples that I can just show you here. One is from Croatia and Serbia. This is a very historic city in Croatia, where in 2014 a large, flooding happened, and they just couldn't get rid of this flooding for many weeks. And in Paris, we had floods which threatened the storage of the Louvre Museum. The famous Louvre Museum was flooded, especially the forecourt of that museum, and a large amount of collection which was in the basement was at high risk, because there was water could just enter in, and it was one of the largest evacuations ever they had to do after the World War. And that was the kind of unprecedented threat that was witnessed. So what we find is that these kinds of incidents in cities is becoming more and more. And in India, you have been hearing about many news of floods, especially in the recent decade. In Chennai in 2015 December, we faced huge flooding, and there was significant loss of life and property. Also, Ujjain, another historic town in India, faced floods in 2015. Uh, Ahmedabad has been facing several floods. In 2015, there was a major flood, and there have been incidents of more floods. And recently, we have heard that in Mumbai also there was immense flooding. Now, of course, when we talk about urban flooding, larger part of the cities is exposed to flooding, but historic part of the cities are even more vulnerable because of the poor infrastructure or outdated infrastructure. In some cases, there's so much water that there is no way that the water can be dissipated in a shorter period of time, leading to stagnation of water for days and weeks. You are all aware of Kashmir floods. Srinagar was devastated in 2014 when there was flooding. And one of the things that has been also noticed in many of this phenomena of urban flooding is that because of the destruction of the natural ecosystem, a lot of areas which were kind of natural water outlets, the canals or areas where water could actually flow, have been built over. And because of that kind of urban development, and I'm going to come back to that issue later on, we find that this kind of flooding is much more predominant now. And obviously, climate change is one of the contributing factors to this increased incidence of climate-related events, from flooding to extreme temperatures to storms and droughts. And cities and microclimate of cities is absolutely impacted much more than other areas in many instances. So So we spoke about disasters, we spoke about climate change and how it impacts cities. And what we are facing now is not a separate thing, it's also connected to what has happened because of urbanization, because of climate change. There are, the animals, their habitat has been changed, where they live, what they eat, what is their eating habit. Everything is getting changed because of the destruction of the ecosystems, of which settlements are an inherent part. And therefore, when we think about all these different kind of disasters, and I'm really happy that this title of this webinar is not just talking about disasters, not about only climate change, not only about pandemics, but talking about all these events because they're all interconnected to each other. And that's something we have to be always mindful of. And coming to human-induced events, we also find that there are large, disasters of significant proportions which are related to, human actions. For example, stampedes, and you have big festivals like Kumbh Mela or Puri Yatra. We find that there are human-induced disasters as well, and not to forget. Uh, the conflicts which have been also targeting many historic cities. You have been hearing what has happened in ISIS due to ISIS war, kind of conflict that has resulted in destruction of Mosul, which was a very important historic city, Aleppo, and in Syria. And so cities are also vulnerable to conflicts. This is how one of the historic neighborhoods of Aleppo was before and after the damage caused by ISIS attack. So I want to emphasize, when we talk about resilient historic cities, we have to think about all the phenomena that are kind of interacting with each other, affecting these cities together. If we can no longer talk about only earthquake prone cities or flood prone cities or pandemic and their impacts on cities, but we have to think about how multiple events come together and affect cities, and the crisis that they generate is quite complex. Now, coming down to heritage dimension of cities, because when we think about how these disasters, climate change, and pandemics situations are affecting urban heritage, let's keep in mind that different dimensions of heritage are impacted. And we can't just focus only on buildings, but we have to start thinking about other components of urban heritage, such as traditional spaces, historic routes, traditional objects, even landscape elements. For example, in Ahmedabad, we have this bird feeders. They are very specific elements of urban neighborhood, or soft landscape elements. Even the social structure of the cities, because a lot of intangible activities are connected to how communities are spatially distributed in cities, and some communities are more vulnerable, and as a result, their intangible practices are more vulnerable than the others. And not to forget traditional water bodies like lakes, canals, wells, which are inherent part of many of our cities in India. And lastly, traditional livelihoods, crafts that are centered in our cities. So all these different elements, and when we talk about how these cities are vulnerable, let's try and understand how these different elements get impacted. So coming to now, what is happening to our cities? Our cities are growing at unprecedented scale, and this graph just shows how they are increasing more than the increase in the rural, population. And the projection is that this is going to be exponentially increasing over time. So what we have to be prepared for is a very high rate of urbanization. But then we also have to keep in mind that, and of course, it is not equally distributed around the world. Some countries are going to be densifying much more than the others. And India, unfortunately, is one of the countries that is projected to densify more than any other country or region in the world. So we have to be even more prepared for the kind of scenario we are going to face in the future. So, what is happening due to this fast pace of urbanization in developing countries like India? And this is something I want to show to you, because this is important for us to keep in mind when we understand how the cities are being impacted. We tend to think about cities being affected in the same way, but it is not so. Some cities are getting, stagnated. They have already grown to quite a significant size. We talk about Delhi or Mumbai. These are large mega cities, or Bangalore. But what we forget is that this kind of urbanization process is is varied. If we talk about the large villages in India, which are going to get urbanized, you can just see this from 1951 to 2011. It's the percentage of increase in the number of large villages turning into cities is much more than how the growth is happening in those cities which are already big and or classified as class 1 cities or mega cities. So it's very uneven, and that I'm also mentioning because that also has an impact on the heritage in these cities. While the cities which were not so much under pressure are increasingly under pressure and will be more under pressure in the next 10 to 20 years. And we have to start focusing on where the pressure is going to be more in the coming years so that we can try and take actions in advance. And that kind of proactive planning is really required in our cities, not only talking about those cities where there is already a lot of growth, there's already a lot of pressure, and where things have in many cases even gone out of control. No, if we think about what's happening in big cities and the heritage in those cities. So the projected scenario, and this is what I have borrowed from one of the very interesting studies which was done at Indian Institute for Human Settlements in Bangalore, where I was working for a while, is that the scenario for cities is going to be very, very um, uh, it's very interesting to see how it's going to be in the future. While some of those cities are going to connect to each other and make a large urban agglomeration, like what we have seen in Delhi, where Noida or Faridabad or Gurgaon are all like coming together and making one huge urban agglomeration, a kind of phenomena that you see in many developed countries like Japan. So that's one part of the story. While there's another part of the story where there are these large villages which are going to get slowly turn into cities and will have all the pressures that big cities face in the coming future. While we talk about all this, let's not also forget about how the economy of these cities is connected. And while I don't talk about heritage now, I think this kind of a larger understanding of urban phenomena is really important for us to consider when we talk about dealing with urban heritage, especially the kind of vulnerabilities they are facing in the light of disasters, pandemics, and climate change. So, top 100 largest cities are actually estimated to produce about 43% of the GDP, with 16% of the population and just 0.24% of the land area. Just look at the disparity, in terms of the amount of land mass that they occupy, the kind of economic contribution that they make to the entire, GDP or the economic growth of the country. So whatever happens in cities is going to affect the country at large, and that will not exclude heritage. And so India is supposed to add 300 million new people to its cities in 30 years. And that is on top of the current urban population of 300 million, of which 70 million are poor. I'm going to come back to that part later. And 3 of the 10 largest megacities in the world will be in India, and 70 other cities will have a population. So this is like, you just look at the numbers and you can imagine like where we are heading. So, impact of urbanization on increasing vulnerability of urban heritage. And I'm going to come to now a few examples. So, let's look at what is happening in Bangalore. So, this is how Bangalore looks today. Some lakes scattered here and there. And you all must be hearing what's happening to those lakes, right? There have been even kind of weird incidents of fires in these lakes because the sewage has got stagnated, and the kind of carbon monoxide produced generates a kind of fire, and has kind of created a kind of fear among residents. But this is how the ecology of the Bangalore looked like. And when the city was originally planned, there was a very, very strong consideration of this whole ecosystem of lakes and water bodies and the canals that connected to each other. So it was not individual lakes that mattered, but it was lakes connected to each other that really played an important role. And in fact, if you look at Bangalore, there is a very interesting system of controlling the flow of water. And you can see here one of the old structures, which is in the middle of the city, which was actually being used as a water gate to control, when there was enough water, water could be taken out. So there was this gate functioned like that. But obviously this has stopped to work because all the canals have been built over, and the kind of rapid urbanization that has totally given no consideration to the existing water system of the cities. And this phenomena of sprawl, we see as a very common phenomena around the world, but more so in developing countries. And the land has been turned into, for all the residential use, and in that process the ecosystem getting destroyed. Now, coming back to urban heritage, which we have to also understand from the point of view of planning. If you look at a lot of historic cities, historic settlements, and this is one of the settlements that I studied, and I think Ronit also studied in his PhD, Bungamati, is interesting because the way it was designed originally was that the settlement was in an area which was not so fertile, but surrounding area was very fertile. And that was where people would go and do their farming, and they will stay in this settlement in a very compact, the morphology was very compact, and the boundaries were actually determined through rituals. You can see in the map on the right side that these are the ritual paths. So you were not supposed to build outside those ritual paths. They in a way served as the boundary of the city. So just look how heritage actually became a way of controlling growth of the city. And that was how they had kind of put in place these kind of rituals and festivals, and ensure that the settlement would stay sustainable over a long time. But obviously this whole process totally got destroyed, and the kind of sprawl is seen everywhere. We also see how traditional knowledge in mitigating disasters, for example, a lot of constructions, this is from Thailand, how they were built before on stilts is no longer practiced anymore in many areas. You want to occupy maximum area, and so you built even the ground floor, and then you end up getting flooded during heavy rains. So a lot of traditional knowledge in planning and design construction, especially in for urban situations, has been neglected. But there's a lot to learn from them, and also learn in the sense of really having a very sustainable relationship of humans to their environment. Now, another thing which I also want to highlight in this is how development is happening around heritage areas. So this is those who are from Delhi will know, but maybe many of you haven't even seen if you haven't been there. This is a beautiful tomb in Nizamuddin, but this is just the tomb, right? If you look what's happening around the tomb, you see the urban reality. Uh, you know, there are new developments of all kinds. There are people living around those settlements now. Obviously, somebody will start to think about it as encroachment, but that is where the problem lies, because you are trying to imagine a city where you try to make a distinction between what is heritage and what is not heritage, and then you forget that actually this is all part of one reality, where there is a change of heritage structures. The heritage structures are having a change relationship to their urban surroundings, both in physical and social terms. And what does that mean in terms of disaster vulnerability? It also means that there is narrow access to these places. So if there's an emergency, you will have bottlenecks that are gonna be there. And also there is a new kind of relationship that is there between the communities living around these heritage structures, and how their historical context was. So we have to deal with these realities. And on the other hand, we have to deal with realities of multiple ownerships, which in fact leads to structural and physical vulnerability, because one house with so many multiple ownerships will not be maintained as one whole, right? And then it leads to different kind of additions and alterations being done, and that in a way affects your physical vulnerability to earthquakes or such kind of events. And on the other hand, such beautiful historic housing, and this is from Ahmedabad in the World Heritage City now, where this beautiful house, all in wood, and so extremely vulnerable to fire, but there's nobody there to really live there because people have moved out of it, and one day maybe it will be just pulled down and made to develop, or even if it is kept, it is very vulnerable to fire because there is no fire prevention here, there's nobody to take care of them. So what I'm trying to arrive at is that when we have to think about disaster vulnerability of cities, we cannot just look at them in isolation. We have to think about the entire urban scenario, how things are happening, and increasing vulnerability of cities as a whole, and in that process affecting the historic part of the city as well, or urban heritage. And let's not forget that cities are made of people, and not all of them are similarly impacted. So there are people who are more impacted than the others. And when we think about urban population or urban communities, there are poor people who are living around heritage structures for a simple reason that even if they don't want to live in there, they have no other choice but to live there. And they are most vulnerable when a disaster hits. So let's not think about only the structures, but also think about those communities or those neighborhoods where people who are more vulnerable and who are living in these neighborhoods, historic neighborhoods. So this interface of disaster risk, climate change, and ill-conceived urban development is what makes disasters increasingly complex. And then there is this challenge of planning, which is very nice to draw these red, blue, and yellow colors, and we neatly, classify them as tanks. And this is actually from Bangalore. And here you can see, neatly you will say land use is residential or commercial, or we have this. But what is the reality really in real you what we find is that many of these urban heritage spaces that are being at risk of turning into parking lots or gardens because you don't recognize what is heritage there. This is in Bangalore. This is one of the areas called Gavipuram, in the middle of the city of Bangalore. And you can see here a small area with a tree with some of those sculptures there, which people used to pray. And now, of course, they are very vulnerable to being turned into a parking lot because the planners will not recognize this, will not take this into consideration. And that leads to a lot of challenges when we talk about disaster risk reduction, where widening of roads becomes an important feature now in many cities. Pulling down trees, we have heard what has happened in Bangalore. And of course, we also don't remember that religious structures, traditional open spaces, and social networks actually contribute in a very positive manner in a disaster situation, because they bring communities together. They act as social anchors, which are really required when disaster strikes. And of course, traditional water systems. I have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go very quick because I want to just come to the end and of the key messages that I want to also bring out. So we need to work with what is available. How do we improve access, escape routes? How do we deal with transportation in our cities? And that requires us a lot to work on scenario-based planning, which I want to advocate very strongly, because I think we have to move away from just master planning with a vision that we create, but try to take into account in a very evidence-based manner what is likely to happen in the future, and then plan for what's going to happen in a predictive by doing a scenario planning, by taking into account all those factors, do the planning. And as I said, learning from tradition, and some of the examples where cities have used the water supply systems to prevent against fire. This is from Kyoto. Ronit will know it very well. And how you can use the traditional waters. There are these features which are in front of every Japanese temple, but how do you use these for actually fire prevention? Because these are local sources of water supply, and you can use them if a fire happens. So you can make alternate use of these things which have a ritual use but can be used for fire prevention. Another big project which was done in Kyoto, in the historic part of the city, where there's a construction of the underground water tank to have a local source of water, so that you are not relying on outside water supply, and then turning it into something which does not affect the landscape or the heritage character of that urban neighborhood. So one also requires a lot of designing and planning and creativity, so that what you introduce in these cities is not affecting the character of these cities, because that's very important for us, because if the character changes, then the values will change. So we on one hand want to make these cities safer, but on the other hand we also want them to keep their heritage value. So again, from Kyoto, how you have an innovative way of doing fire prevention by keeping the character of that historic house, but still you are making available these hydrants which are used by the local communities to prevent against fires. And then such similar example, I'm showing another example from Albania, where they use the traditional water tank for fire prevention in one of the historic towns of Giocastra, again using. And last part, and I'm ending there, is the importance of engaging communities in disaster risk reductions. This is another example. Japan has a very strong tradition of engaging communities and understanding their ideas on disaster risk reduction. So in the historic neighborhood, you work with the communities living in them and try to reduce disaster risk. That's the last part. I think this is what is important for us to keep in mind, that we need to integrate adaptation and mitigation strategies in regular heritage management procedures. And that means that when we talk about climate change and disaster risk management strategies for urban heritage, we need to connect them to the climate change and DRM policies and plans for the city or the region in which urban heritage is located. And on the other hand, we need to have systems for protection and management of urban heritage itself. And all this is connected to larger urban development, which is the key point that I want to make. And in order to make that happen, you definitely need transformative change, which will require us to have a coordination of different departments, different actors, and that will not happen easily. We all know it very well. And that's why transformative change is what is really the key to making our cities, especially the historic neighborhoods, resilient. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you very promptly put out the need of the hour, where we really need to look at heritage from a very broad point of view and not look at any element in isolation, and of course integrate adaptation and mitigation strategies in the regular management practices. We look forward to hearing so much more from you in the panel discussion. But without further delay, I would like to introduce to you all our first case study presenter as we move on to the second part of our webinar today. Our first case study presenter is Dr. Shumona Gupta, who is an associate professor at the Department of Architecture in IIT Kharagpur, West Bengal. She is presently working as an associate professor in the Department of Architecture and Regional Planning in IIT Kharagpur, and has worked in a consultancy organization as a senior urban planner after completion of a doctoral degree and master's degree from her present place of work. Her major interest was in transportation, land use, and infrastructure facility planning. Prior to this, she worked for 14 years, initially as a professional architect and later as a lecturer in the Government Polytechnic College, West Bengal. She completed her bachelor's degree in architecture in 1992 from Calcutta University, and she will be presenting the first case study for the day. Over to you, Dr. Shumona Gupta.
Thank you, Shukrit.
Just a small, while Dr. Gupta is preparing her slide, shares her slide, I would just like to inform all the presenters that if you have any questions, you may kindly send the questions to Aditi, who's a part of the webinar today, and she will collate the questions and we will look into the questions at the end of the webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, thank you, Shukrit, for the nice introduction. It is a great initiative for East Zone ICOMOS India for organizing this webinar series, and I feel privileged being invited as a speaker. Along with, before presenting, I acknowledge the support from Sri Vishwanath Poshak, who worked for this project, which part of it, which I will be presenting. So let me share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, it is visible.
So the topic of the presentation is planning for resilience to anthropogenic shocks in heritage precincts, with the case study discussion will be on Ratha Yatra Puri. Now, the town of Puri needs no introduction. It was also mentioned in Jiggashu sir's presentation on the human stampedes which experienced in the Kumbh Mela or the Ratha Yatra, etc. But how the management, the preparedness has left it to be resilient, the people to absorb this resilience is to be discussed or highlighted more in this presentation. So it is known, Puri is known as is one of the four dhams, and it is because of the Sri Jagannath temple and ASI monument declared since 1975. It is also important for its beaches, and it attracts year-long tourists and pilgrims. The Heritage Precinct is delineated around it by the comprehensive, as presented in the comprehensive development plan, and it is further the grade 2 heritage precinct and has heritage buildings of local importance, particularly the mosques, the temples, and the palace. So the chariot festival or the Ratha Yatra, which is held during the month of July during the monsoons, where Sri Jagannath along with his siblings, the elder brother Balaram and sister Subhadra, moves in a chariot from the Jagannath temple to the Gundicha temple, and pulling the chariot in which they travel is believed to be a holy act by the Hindus, and thus it attracts lakhs of pilgrims, which surpasses much beyond the city capacity, which is merely around 2 lakhs. Thus, it is very important to take a note the pressure which the infrastructure needs to handle. The crowd majorly comes from the states and the state and the adjoining states. And now let us look into the Heritage Precinct. Here is the Jagannath temple and the Gundicha temple, and the peach colored patch around it is the precinct, which is again divided into 3 zones. Zone 1 is between the Jagannath temple and the Gundicha temple, where the entire event is held. The spine, the Baradanda, along which the chariot moves, the red dotted line, is 40 meters at this point and gradually widens to 125 meters near the Gundicha temple. Hence, the entire bottleneck usually happens in this particular area. 2/3 of the road usually is encroached by hawkers, parkings, non-motorized vehicles, etc. during the entire year. And the buildings usually are having shoppings at the bottom, and the upper parts are usually hotels or residences or are institutional in character. This entire stretch is almost 3 kilometers, and here you see some of the glimpses of the Puri Maharaja Palace, the Jagannath temple. Here you see the Gundicha temple and the large crowds focused here. Now, let us try to see the cross section. Here are the commercial buildings, the institutional buildings, and encroachment on both sides, and leaving a small 16 meters for the motorized items. Another cross section along this road is the Puri Sadar Hospital and the hotels on the other side. And this is how the place transforms on the day of Ratha Yatra, and it continues for 9 days until the chariots retreat to the Jagannath temple. Now coming to the heritage elements, you see some, mostly they are dharmashalas, the mathas or the temples, and this is the activity along the entire road. Now during the festival, the entire road gets transformed into a sea of human beings with their requirements, which are all provided beyond the event place. Now, how is this entire event managed? This is a learning for us because they have developed this through years of experience. Coming to the structure of the presentation now, it is the preparedness, how they hold the festival, how they manage and participate during the event, the heritage values and the sense of belongingness of the citizen, and finally the resilience to the shocks as an after effect of the religious event. Now coming to the preparedness for hosting the religious event, it is much beyond the event place. So the event is foreseen at a regional context. They keep into account the entry points, the railway stations, which are the high occupancy vehicles, the sacred routes of travel, which also Juggasu sir pointed out, the parking control, the traffic management beyond the city, and they take help of the adjoining districts. Then is the understanding of the population density, how the directional flow of the pilgrims take place, because they need to plan for the facilities for them. Then how these facility points are designed, providing adequate facility, and how they help in decentralizing the entire infrastructural need, because these are all physiological needs. Every pilgrim needs food, needs water, and obviously there is the output part, the sewerage and the waste management. Adequate accommodation, that is night shelters, because pilgrims who are coming walking needs night shelter in between and also in and around the city. So availability of the land, location of the land from the event place, because they after a certain point become walking pilgrims. Finally, it is the law and order, the police, the volunteering, and the local community participation, which integrates all these functions. Above all is the dissemination of information, where the information and broadcasting department works. This is the administrative deployment hierarchy of the public functions, where district magistrate holds the key role, and all the departments work hand in hand, and without anyone, each of them equally contribute towards the success of this entire event. Now coming to the facility locations at a regional level, you can see right from Cuttack and Bhubaneswar, the NH203 leads to Puri. So Puri is a dot here, Puri is a dot here, and you can see at the regional level there are so many facility points to hold the pilgrims to avoid traffic jams or ease out the pilgrims for their basic needs. And finally, they come and terminate into these 3 or 4 locations. One is the railway station and 4 locations around the city of Puri. So so these holding points actually help in traffic management, help in understanding the load at the event location, at the center of the city. This is another slide which brings out how much of the pedestrian volume the city has to experience, where the population of the city is only below 2 lakhs. So it is by trains around 3 lakhs of the people come, and pedestrians are of the order of 3 lakhs coming to the city. Now let us have a closer look into the city. The boundary is the city municipality boundary is shown in red dots, and now you can see the scattered location of the facility points and the parkings, where the major parkings are shown highlighted in yellow. The Puri terminal station. Here it is to be noted that is the Talwania bus stand, which has now been shifted to another location. Here is the Gundicha bus stand, which operates as the command center. Here is the way towards the Brahmagiri, that is the Chilka side, and this is the historic route which people prefer to travel. On the right side is Konark, or the east side is Konark. So now you can well understand that the event location is between the Jagannath temple and the Gundicha temple, whereas the facilities are spread all around, and the transport system stops at within the periphery of the city. So they are not allowed beyond. So pilgrims are mostly on foot, and only you can see some scanty parkings which are for the two-wheelers or some administrative parkings. So this actually helps the authority to manage the entire traffic flow. People are all on foot, and it has also taken care that they are within 3 kilometers of 3 kilometers from the event space. So people the pilgrims can walk comfortably to the venue. Here are some snapshots for the temporary facilities. Here is the accommodation plan. Here is the large bus terminals. This is again another accommodation plan. Here is the auto stand. It is the Puri railway station, which has several temporary structures hold to manage or to host the people, host the pilgrims. And here is a pilgrim satisfaction on the facility point. So whatever is provided at the points, also along the Grand Road, the pilgrims are more or less satisfied. Now coming to the management and participation during the event. So everything is planned. First, let us look into the management and how the people respond to it. This is the intensity of activity along the regular day versus a weekend. This is a regular day scenario where you can see the hawkers on the street and spilling over onto the road, and there are parkings. People are moving along with the traffic on it. Here is a highlight of cows moving here. Around 500 cows are taken from the Grand Road to the Kind House just to clear off for the event. And that also needs a management. And this finally turns to the sea of human beings as during the event is held. This is the bus routes which are plying through the Grand Road are now stopped on the day and that transforms into littered road, ambulances moving up and down to the Sadar hospital, which I had shown you in the cross section, bringing casualties who may be down because of dehydration, because of stampede, because of some enteric problems, etc. The activities now along the route. Throughout the day, the pilgrims keep on coming, and they need food, they need water, they need beverages, they need medicine, they need water sprinkling, as these pictures show. And these are done by the n number of volunteers who are majorly school students, the senior school students or college students. Let us look into how the pilgrim moves inside, because as the point of stampede comes in, as the point of rush, during the event time, the entire Grand Road is flooded with people. But there are only 2 points of entry. One from this point of the VIP road, and the other at the Red Cross Road coming from the railway station side.
Dr. Gupta?
Yes.
I would just like you to, if you could just wrap up, because
Okay.
we are lacking in time. So thank you so much.
Okay. So finally, this road is controlled movement from the different web-like streets, which are used for evacuation purpose. This is a slide from how the evacuation takes place, during if there is a case of stampede. Next slide. These are various primary surveys conducted along the road on the commercial side and the residents. Here are some points highlighted, which are the difficulties faced by the people over there residing at that place. And here are some of the views of the shopkeepers, which are access-related problems, congestion-related problems, unavailability of public transport, and highlighting the garbage disposal. So it was mostly paper and plastics, cardboards, cartoons, water pouches, which are lying randomly onto the road. The service providers are engaged in city cleaning, food distribution, traffic control, water distribution, crowd management, ambulance assistance, etc. And here it is the summary of the activities or the participation which comes from the people's side. Even the medical response is also quite strong, which the surveys had shown. Now, coming to the resilience to the shocks as an after effect of the religious event, we see that at the end of the festival, the 360 metric tons of solid waste is produced at the Grand Road. Forget about all the other facility points, and they become a nuisance. This littering finally chokes the open drains, causing waterlogging, infection to the urban environment, and the government had taken up the plastic-free Rath Yatra attempted since 2019. But another important point, step towards the community protest to avert disaster was the shifting of the bus terminal from Talbania to Malatipatpur because of the biological contamination, because of open defecation by the people who come in. There is a mismatch of the demand and supply and the habits of the people. The leaching of the petrol and the diesel from the vehicles finally contaminates their sweet water inside this, which is not insufficient for the Puri city. So the citizens have protested against this poor water quality. The same has happened in the Baliapada sweet water zone, where water contamination has happened due to the leakage from sewer water, and also these loads of pollution had also affected the wildlife at Balukhand Reserve Forest. So with all these, the steps are being taken up, but however, most of it is a successful story, and this integrated planning approach has actually helped the Puri government, the Odisha government, or the Puri city to manage the entire festival. The preparedness for it is very important, and the risk assessment and the management of it is the key learning from the entire case study. Participation from every stakeholder also is of highest importance, because without them, the management cannot work sustainably. So these are the key references, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. I think you very nicely pointed out the different challenges that many communities who are so close to such religious events face in such times. And with the help of the government and mobilizing the importance of these religious events to the people, I think we will in the future develop much better ways to mitigate probable human-induced hazards that these events might cause. I would now like to move. Thank you, Dr. Gupta, again. And I would like to move to our second case study, which will be presented by Dr. Ronit Chatterjee, who is a PhD in environmental management from Kyoto University, Japan, and currently a JST postdoctoral fellow at Kyoto University, working on uncertainty and transformation in patches in India and Bangladesh. Trained as an architect, Ronit did his master's in disaster management from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. His work focuses mainly on disaster management while spanning across architecture, heritage, governance, private sector, and ecosystem services. He has worked previously with the UN agencies, national and local governments in Asia and India, in particular local communities, private businesses, and NGOs. Ronit is a recipient of the IRDR Young Scientist Fellowship and is a CEM member of IUCN. He has authored several academic publications and reports on the topic of disaster management. He is an amateur photographer with a few publications in the National Geographic as well. The presentation that he's going to present is titled Managing Uncertainty and Transformation in Sundarbans in the Face of Cascading Hazards. Over to you, Dr. Chatterjee.
Thank you, Sukrit.
Most welcome.
And let me share my screen, which I had done earlier. Sorry for taking your screen space. Hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Please put it
Yeah,
on the
a very good evening
presentation
to
mode.
everyone from.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I have done that. Very good evening to everyone from you, and pleasure to present many of you whom I know and have been mentor to me, and I have been interacting also. So this presentation, I'm actually presenting a Tapestry project, which I'm currently involved in. And here we are working on 3 patches in India, which is one is Sundarbans, the other one is in Mumbai, and the third patch is in Kutch, which one of our later discussant also is part of it, Sandeep Bhai, and you will possibly hear from him something related to it. This is interesting project because it connects all these patches because of because of mangroves. And mangroves is something which possibly is what I will also talk about today, and how that links our case of Sundarbans. So let me take you from the land of Jagannath and chariot to the land of tigers and bone bibi. Before we move into the details of this case study in Sundarbans, let me just give an overview of why Sundarban is a World Heritage, just for your information, and it would help you in connecting also to the presentation. So there are 2 criteria for which Sundarbans, the Indian part of Sundarbans, was kind of nominated as a World Heritage Site, and it mainly delves on the uniqueness of its formation, the plant biodiversity and terrestrial and marine environment that is there, and also because of the Royal Bengal tigers, which are kind of very known to most of the people, I am sure. So if we look at Sundarbans in a glimpse, Sundarban is a big area which is shared between India and Bangladesh. Bangladesh actually has a much bigger stretch of Sundarbans. In Indian side, we have 54 inhabited islands and 48 forest islands, and they are actually having different forms of it. Like some of them are national parks and reserve forest, and there are very limited access to those. And within this 54 inhabited islands, we have around 4.5 million people who are living. And you can see here, if you look at the map on the right, this yellow part and possibly the orange and the bit darker maroon here. So these are the 3 areas possibly where the inhabitation is, or the people are living. And the rest, the greener ones, are where there is not much, these are either national parks or reserve forest, and there is not people who are living there. And of this 4.5 million people, almost 3.5 million people's livelihood, their life, is dependent on the forest. And the different kind of livelihood which are there is rain-fed monocropping, fishing, seed, like collecting prawn seeds, timber, honey collection, and every day around 50,000 people, this is just on average, actually enter the forest area. So you can imagine that the forest area in Sundarbans is actually something which people are totally dependent on. And then when we look at the kind of climatic vulnerability zone that's there on the right hand side of the map, you can see that possibly as we move towards the kind of water body, the risk increases and it's much more exposed to the vagaries of nature. And one of the things which you might connect immediately with Sundarbans is the recent cyclone Amphan, which affected this area in 2020 May. And if you look at Sundarbans, it has been on the receiving end of the cyclones from like it has a long history of cyclones. And if we look at the return period of cyclones, possibly a very severe cyclone would have a return period of 3.3 years, and two more, like not so severe cyclone would have a return period of 2.9, 2.6. So that's the kind of return period that we're looking at. And the last major cyclone which affected this area was Cyclone Aila in 2009. I had a chance to be there after the Cyclone Aila to do a kind of assessment of the damage. And now currently we are working as in the Sundarbans, but I could not go there because of the current COVID pandemic situation. So this Sundarbans landscape is very unique. It connects the ecology and ecosystem services, community, livelihood, and the hazard and climate risk. These are the four components possibly which connects through its sociocultural practices, the livelihood and livelihood dependency on the ecosystem services as economic assets, the livelihood diversification to manage the climate hazards and the climate risk, and also the community, the local knowledge that is there in the community for managing this climate risk or the natural hazards that this area is prone to. So this has evolved over a period of time, and this knowledge is very much ingrained in the local community or the community who is staying there. If I look at the current situation, recent studies suggest that possibly the mangroves are depleting. Around 2.2% of the mangroves have depleted between 2017 to 2019. And also I was looking at other studies, and it says that there is a chance of 30 to 60% of the mangroves actually getting destroyed in this area by 2100. Also, this area is having issues of erosion, salinity, ingression, and recently there are issues of agamora, which is kind of a plant disease which is affecting Sundari tree. So the Sundarbans, it's Sundar in Bengali means beautiful, and Ban is forest, and Sundari tree is very specific to this area, and it's said that possibly Sundarban also gets its name from Sundari tree. And the Sundari trees are getting affected. The top of the Sundari tree is drying up, and that is becoming a kind of issue more and more, kind of damaging the vegetation along the coastal areas, coastal islands. Also, there are losses of fishes, loss of agricultural land, especially in Cyclone Amphan, there has been a huge loss, and also in Cyclone Aila, there had been a lot of loss of agriculture. And migration, tourism, these are something which are affecting this area. So this Sundarban as a case study is very unique because of its spatial temporal linkage. That it's not only that it's spatially it's evolving, it's getting eroded. I won't say evolving, possibly eroded, and it's very kind of fragile, kind of fragile geographically, and the temporal knowledge base that is built into it is also very unique. The sociocultural practices that has developed because of this spatial temporal linkage to this place has given it the place based identity, customary rights, religion of the forest, and I'll come to that, the Palagan, and which is a very important aspect, customary aspect of this area. Also, this area has been affected over a period of time by the government-led developments and some incidences like Marichapi massacre that happened in 1978. And recently, as we see that Kolkata is a big city and it is exerting a pressure on this, the urbanization pressure and the urban-rural linkage, and that is defining the migration and tourism aspects in this area. So these all in combination are playing an important role and possibly are affecting the two criterias which I have shown earlier. So as I said, that possibly Sundarbans had a mix of tangible, intangible, and this overlap between tangible and intangible heritage. And that developed because of the experiences people had and the way they kind of try to mitigate those crisis situations and the kind of daily experiences that they had. And if I look at the kind of practices that are built into their daily life, like say the fishing season starts in late Kartik, which is like in November, and people believe that if they do fishing before that, possibly and they actually have experienced that possibly the fish that they catch are not really the big ones, possibly the young ones, and that will not help them in regenerating the fish that are growing there. The second one is demarcation of sacred zone for goddess Ganga. So they do not fish there, and that actually becomes a breeding site for fishes, and it helps in kind of regeneration of fishes in that area. The traditional early warning systems, I remember talking to people and they know very well that if there is a cyclone approaching, if it's a high tide, if it's a low tide, which way will the typhoon go, the cyclone go? Will it go towards Orissa? Will it strike Sundarbans? Will it move towards Bangladesh? So there is that kind of knowledge base available within people. Also looking at like this praying to Bipadnashini and for safety from disasters. And then the fishing community also kind of believes that if they pray, if the newlywed wife prays, possibly they would be saved from the cyclones when they go out for fishing. So there are these kind of belief system which is already there within the community. And the most interesting thing which I had mentioned earlier also about is Bon Bibi. Bon Bibi is the lady of the forest, and possibly the kind of narrative of Bon Bibi developed during the Great Bengal famine in 1778, if I remember it correctly. And that's when this thing came in. And it is said that the Bon Bibi is the protector of the people, and the Bon Bibi saved. And there's three, there's this narrative of how Bon Bibi saved a young child from being attacked by a tiger. And then there is this manifestation of the tiger in another god, which is Dakin Rai, who is supposed to change forms. And then there was this fight between Bon Bibi, and finally Bon Bibi vanquishes Dakin Rai and Narayani. Narayani is the mother of Dakin Rai. So there has been this kind of narratives which are there. But what has led to this is basically four things. If I look at the customary regulations which has evolved out of it, the interesting thing is people refrain from defecating and smoking and washing utensils within the forest. This is something which has actually evolved because of the belief in Bon Bibi. Then also not catching fish during breeding seasons, then not putting fire to the beehives, or kind of using alternate patches for felling trees. So there are this regenerating kind of customs which are helping in regeneration. Then protection of the wildlife, like you are not supposed to go into the forest with arms, or also it helps in coexistence, like certain times of the day you are not supposed to enter the forest. When you enter the forest, you are supposed to pray to Bon Bibi. So there has been this kind of customary regulations which have been built into the daily life and activities, and this has also brought in unification for the conflict of common resources. So there are two main followers, like Hindu population and Muslim population, but born baby has been prayed over by both the population for safety. And then this born baby's Palagan. Pala means narrative and Gan is song. So this has started being used for kind of propagating this kind of a regulatory custom from one generation to the other. And what has happened in recent times is the narratives have started also incorporating the recent events, like say Cyclone Ayla or the Morijhapi incident, where 400 people were killed and their bodies were disposed in the water. So these kind of incidents also have become part of Bon Bibi, and people look up to Bon Bibi for protection. And even when I was talking to people during post Ayla, they said that, oh, Bon Bibi is there, we can be protected by her blessings. So we don't need to really look up to the cyclone threats so much. And in the recent times, what has been happening is possibly kind of dilution of this concept of the belief in Bon Bibi, like the creation of religious identity, Bon Bibi versus Bon Devi. So it's now getting divided. There is a conflict between Hindu and Muslim communities. The disaster-induced migration resulting in loss of culture. People are moving and they are losing this touch with the local culture. Increase in tiger and attacks, and that reduces people's belief, saying that, oh, Bon Bibi is possibly not blessing us anymore, or reduce access to forest, and because of government regulations doesn't make them pray to Bon Bibi so much as they used to do. So these all have been having a cumulative effect, and as a result, and along with it, what we see is the increase in invasive species, Cyclone Ayla marginalizing more people further. And like say post Ayla, 64% of the population migrated for economic stress, and the recent Amphan actually led to more further loss of livelihood and mobility. So these all are playing an important role in diluting the cultural heritage, possibly the belief system in Sundarbans. Just the last slide here. So what we can look up to is possibly integrating the cultural belief system into risk communication measures and mitigation measures, so that people realize and continue it further. Changing the cultural assets to economic assets, and this is something which possibly I'll talk later, and something which we are also working in Kutch. Harnessing local knowledge, and especially like using joint forest management, where this local knowledge for protecting the mangroves can be integrated. Merging traditional early warning systems with the local technologies to help in agriculture. And micro planning possibly is a much better way to manage these areas than making micro plans. Thank you. And over to you, Sukhpreet.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chatterjee. I think very nicely you have portrayed the different vulnerabilities that these tribal communities are going through due to the change of ecosystem, and how traditional practices have been a boon for these communities to live up to these and face these hazards, both natural and human induced. We will hear much more from you in the panel discussion, but at this point, we have finished the second phase of our webinar, and we will be moving to the discussion rounds, where it is a privilege and an honor to introduce to you our moderator for the evening, Professor Shangamitra Basu, who is the coordinator of the National Scientific Committee on Historic Towns and Villages, ICOMOS India. She's a retired professor from the Department of Architecture and Regional Planning, IIT Kharagpur. Dr. Basu is an architect from Jadavpur University, an urban planner from SPA Delhi, and a master's in conservation studies from York University, UK, and her PhD from IIT Kharagpur. Dr. Basu has over 35 years of experience in teaching, research guidance, and consultancy projects in the field of heritage studies and historic preservation. During 2011-2014, she served as a member of the National Monuments Authority, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and at present, a consultant of the West Bengal government for declaring Coach Bihar as a heritage city. Dr. Basu is also a member of INTAC Advisory Committee, New Delhi Heritage Conservation Committee of the Kolkata Municipal Corporation, and Technical Committee of Victoria Memorial Hall Restoration. She's authored several academic publications and presented papers in international and national conferences. I would now like to give the spotlight to Professor Basu to take forward the next few discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shukrit. After a very interesting and enlightening discussion by the case study and the key speaker, we now have the panel, very distinguished panel of experts joining us in the panel discussion today. I shall introduce them, all three of them. Aditi, can I have the introductory bios, please? Aditi, can you share your screen? So we have Dr. Ripol Kanji. Dr. Ripol Kanji is a computer scientist at heart and a disaster risk management professional who prefers to call himself part academician and part practitioner. Ripol works with the government of Gujarat at the Gujarat Institute of Disaster Management as a research scientist and program manager, while academically he is associated as a young scientist from forums like Integrated Research on Disaster Risk, which is a transdisciplinary research platform of the International Science Council and the United Nations Office for the Disaster Risk Reduction. Ripol is the co-founder of the National Platform of Youth and Young Professionals of India working in disaster risk management and climate change adaptation, known as the Confederation of Risk Reduction Professional, CRRP. The platform currently has more than 200 members from various different backgrounds coming from reputed universities and organizations from all over the world. CRRP is a part of the U-Inspire Alliance, which is a global movement of YYPs across the globe supported by UNDRR and UNESCO. He also heads the working group on social entrepreneurship at the U-Inspire Alliance. Our next panelist is Shondi Vimani, who is the founder of Shajivan and Hunashala Foundation. For over 3 decades, Sandeep has been living and working with indigenous communities in Kutch, which lies on the western borders of India and Pakistan. An environmentalist at heart, he has trained as an architect and worked with communities all over India, building with natural materials and revitalizing their traditional building crafts. He has set up 2 pioneering institutions, Hunashala Foundation, which works on built habitats, and Shajivan, which has enabled marginalized communities to regenerate and conserve the ecologies of their region, including conserving traditional water management system, wildlife conservation, pastoralist animal breeds, and seed conservation. Hunashala Foundation has over last 2 decades pioneered a vocabulary of architecture that uses natural materials, harnesses the diverse traditional building skills of artisans, and strengthens the voice of the marginalized in cities and villages. Hunashala has helped state governments in India and countries including Nepal, Iran, and Indonesia design their post-disaster policies and help them build thousands of homes. Hunashala trains hundreds of architecture students and building artisans every year to practice an environmentally and aesthetically sustainable architecture. Shandip looks to painting, storytelling, yoga, and the fascinating world of insect to fuel his forays at work. Our third panelist is Ms. Shalini Dashgupta. Shalini Dashgupta is a conservation architect based in New Delhi and runs a multidisciplinary practice offering services in architecture, interior design, and conservation for the last 26 years. She has received her formal training under internationally noted architects V.V. Doshi, Raje from CEPT Ahmedabad, and conservation studies from SP New Delhi. Since starting Heritage Conservation and Design Center in 1993, The firm has been focusing on adaptive reuse and putting historic buildings to contemporary use with wide range of clients ranging from Claridge, Imperial, Lalit, ITC, Marriott, Hilton, Astor, etc. Currently, she is actively involved in the urban conservation of the Braj region and the iconic sites of Khajuraho, Bodhgaya, and Hampi. She is also actively involved in imparting lectures on conservation and creating awareness both at formal and informal level. She is also visiting faculty in SP New Delhi and also the Department of Fashion Communication, NIFT. She has been active ICOMOS member, and earlier she was the Northern representative, and now she is holding the post of Secretary ICOMOS India since 2019. She is an expert member of the International Scientific Committee of Heritage Documentation, SIPA, and the National Focal Point for Climate Change and Heritage Working Group of ICOMOS. She is currently undergoing her doctoral research in the field of heritage and climate change, and generally talking about the warm, humid climate of West Bengal and thermal comfort in heritage buildings. So with this introduction of the expertise from all over and varied, I will like to first go one by one with my question. My first question is to Ripol. Ripol, please share your presentation.
Sure, ma'am.
Your question to me is, yes, Ripol, pandemic due to COVID-19 is unprecedented in recent time. Since the onslaught of this pandemic, you have been actively working in Ahmedabad city, especially in the whole historic parts, where it seems the concentration of cases were quite high in the beginning. These historic areas and precincts are generally quite different in many respects. They are different from other parts of the city. In your study and surveys, which you have been doing, have you been able to identify some specific traits that distinguish these areas in terms of people's response, their efforts, and ability to face the challenges due to restore normalcy? Over to Ripol.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ICOMOS, for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences. What I would do is that I would run through a presentation, which is an account of what happened in the old city of Ahmedabad, which is, of course, a living heritage in its own right. I would walk through examples where we need to learn from, and I will also walk through examples from where we probably could see what we could have done better and whether there are chances of replication or not. Before I go into the details of the cases that I want to talk about, I just wanted to make sure that we all are on the same understanding, because these terms like resilience and sustainable development has been threatened by ambiguity to the extent that people have different interpretations, people have different understandings of it, which is, of course, the most rational thing to have. But still, I just wanted to go through these terminologies before I start talking about the core subject. So what is resilience? Of course, there is a definition to resilience given by the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, which focuses upon certain attributes of a community or a system which we are talking about. It should have the ability to resist, absorb, accommodate, and many other things. But the interesting fact is that when you talk about resilience with different people coming from different countries, coming from different regions, even coming from different communities, you get to understand that the understanding of resilience is very different. As in, the word resilience have different interpretations in different languages also. So the way people understand resilience is completely different. We did a very small exercise with members coming from the BIMSTEC countries, and we found out that resilience actually has different connotations to different people. It means adaptability, it means bouncing back, it can be elastic, it can also be merely responding to an event. So what is important is to understand what resilience means to you, as in the community that we are talking about. We also know about the sustainable development, and in general, if I go by the latest trends, the sustainable development is often associated with the 17 sustainable development goals. But the idea is that sustainable development is also old school. Why? Because now we are talking about risk-informed sustainable development, where we are moving from an era of responding to disaster, responding to the consequences of an extreme event, to an era where we will probably be able to manage our risks rather than managing our disasters, where we are more prepared to live with our uncertainties. So that is something that we are striving to achieve. This is a conceptual presentation of what risk-informed sustainable development looks like when you see all the 17 goals, which are basically the assimilations of the different sectors of development coming together. Some goals which we have to work to increase, some goals which we have to work to reduce. And of course, there are international frameworks that are assisting it, that are complementing and supplementing it, and there are also national policies at play. So we will have to have a very concerted view of how we look at development and how it is risk informed. Why am I talking about all this? Because as Professor Jigasu already pointed out, that when we are talking about culture and heritage, it's not merely the site or the precinct, it's basically the whole urban scenario that eventually develops around it. So there's a lot to be considered when we are talking about risk-informed sustainable development. Now, when we take the word risk-informed sustainable development and try to pit it against the understanding of how a disaster is managed, this is something like this, where we try to understand our risk, where we try to prevent the risk, we try to prevent the new risk, we also reduce the existing risk, and then we also talk about enhancing capacities and then responding to an event, making sure that it does not become a disaster. And if it becomes a disaster, then we respond to it and ensure that it's built back better. So that is how we understand risk-informed sustainable development. But for that, we need to understand our risk first. So we need to be more risk literate. We need to be more risk savvy. But basically, it's very difficult because understanding disaster risk is not as easy as it seems to be, because disaster risk is very systemic in nature. It's not that something that you do today and its consequence will be visible to you the next day. It's something that you do today and you think that you are doing correct, but its manifestation over a period of time, you will see that no, my decision was wrong. So that is the systemic nature of disaster risk, which manifests over a period of time. It can vary spatially, it can vary temporally. So that is a very important aspect, and it makes the assessment, the understanding very difficult. Now, risk needs to be understood holistically as well. For example, it's not the duty of only one department or one sector. For example, if we talk about the old city of Ahmedabad, it's not just the jurisdiction of the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation. There are many other departments that are at play, and they all have to work in a perfect sync so that the idea of risk-informed sustainable at least can be achieved. Then risk needs to be managed by everyone. There is, of course, an idea that whenever there is a disaster, it's the government who has to play an important role. Of course, that is there, but then managing risk, managing disaster is everyone's business. In case of a city like old Ahmedabad, the idea that is inevitably an impediment is who is the owner of those buildings. Because as Professor Jigasu pointed out, that there are many buildings which are left alone, people move out, and then they become a prospect from where an event may happen. So who is the owner of that site, that building? So this also is a very important thing that needs to be taken care of. And we often miss this, and that's why understanding risk is very difficult. Again, disaster risk has an overarching bearing. For example, when a disaster risk actually manifests its effect and impact as a disaster, it has a widespread effect over a region. For example, in case of the pandemic, the effect and the impact is visible all over the world. But resilience is actually something very local. So when we talk about resilience, of course, there is the concept of building a national resilience to something. But then the idea should obviously crop from the small communities, from the individual level, from the household level. So all these things make it more difficult for a person or for a community or even for the government who has a role to play in it, identifying, assessing, and understanding risk very difficult. Moving ahead, let's just talk about the numbers that we have now. We have Ahmedabad leading the number of cases in Gujarat, and I have also pointed out Gandhinagar, where I am currently based out of. And you see, this is the number of cases that is on the rise, of course, after the Diwalis, but now we have managed to control it somehow. So I will just hustle back and forth in time just to give you an idea of how it was before the lockdown started opening up, so that you get an idea of what we thought about would have happened and what actually happened, and how these examples can be related to other areas, possibly in examples of West Bengal. So the idea is that in the initial days, Ahmedabad, the old city of Ahmedabad, was basically the hotspot of COVID-19 cases because of the population density, the active number of cases, the socioeconomic conditions, the age of the population, and the health sector preparedness. Interesting thing is that in 1980 there were cases reported of the Spanish flu, but possibly we did not learn anything from it. So here we are again. Just to give you an idea of how the old Ahmedabad looks like, this is a walk through the heritage of Ahmedabad. Which the best part is that it starts from a Hindu temple and ends at a Muslim mosque, that is Jama Masjid, which is absolutely interesting. And then, of course, as pointed out by previous speakers, it's not just about this heritage that we are talking about. It's about the neighborhood, the vibrancy of the neighborhood that has cropped up eventually. So there is this Manik Chowk, which is less touristy and more like a food street, which functions throughout the night. And just due to this, the jewelry shops that are around, they do not need to keep any security. So this is very interesting to see how the neighborhood crops up, right? And then it's very sad to see that all these things, for example, Manik Chowk, for example, the vegetable market, for example, the market which is famous for clothes, and even the market which is famous for books. Those of you who are from Kolkata will probably relate to College Street Book Market. And imagine how it had we were feeling when it was under lockdown and everything was closed. The vibrancy, everything died off. So that is how it was before we started thinking of opening up the lockdown. Now, just to give you an idea of how old Ahmedabad looked like, the land use pattern, you see, it's a very mixed site to talk about. And then the issues that we were facing during reopening, and I'm sure that those of you who were involved in this idea or assessing the government in some way of how to open up these precincts or these places would have come across that the environment probably is not conducive to practicing physical distancing. Hygiene was, of course, a demotivating factor. Social behavior, people are still not wearing masks. I don't know why, but that was a problem. Fear and anxiety, of course. Celebrations are likely to go down. Of course, in Kolkata, we had Durga Puja, but then in Gujarat, we did not have Navratri. So that was a downplay to everything. I don't know why my slides are behaving weird, but okay, fine. And then, of course, the tourism took a hit. So what happened? An example where we probably can learn from and also think about what and how we can replicate it. So as you all remember, only essential services were allowed during the lockdown. So what happened is that those shopkeepers who were not into essential services, they started selling vegetables because it was an essential, it was necessity. So what happened that this idea was identified by the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, and they started a complete drive of getting e-rickshaws, and they were selling vegetables. They also included the women's self-help group. So you see how the different dots were connected, how different groups were brought in, and this entire thing was made into a drive, which kind of gave impetus to, you know, start the economy once again, at least for those who businesses were going down. But then there were, of course, problems because these services were allowed only in the containment zones, and outside the containment zones, there was Big Basket, there was Reliance Fresh. So there was, of course, this problem. Eventually, after a few of the series of opening up of lockdowns, the civic authorities also started screening and issuing licenses. But then you know how it is in India, of course, when you are issuing licenses, there are so many problems, corruption. I don't need to speak about it. Of course, every one of us have an idea about it. So moving on, now let's just take this idea and try to replicate it in somewhere else. Let's say Kolkata. Can this licensing, the idea of licensing, be replicated in other traditional shops? For example, if we talk about Durga Puja, Kumotuli, for example, can we do that? Could we have done that? I don't know. There's something that we need to think about, because you see, when you are actually going with the idea of licensing, you need to have a system in place. You need to have a complete record of things, and most of these trades are basically unorganized. So that's a problem, right? And then, of course, there was the government promotional schemes, Atmanirbhar Bharat, and all these and all that, but they were applicable to MSMEs. And the question to be asked is that how many of these traditional shops, traditional crafts are eligible to these kind of promotional schemes? In fact, how many of them are actually aware of this, right? Then there was an option of going digital, aggregation apps. For example, you develop an app where you bring all the vegetable sellers or all the confectionaries together, and then you build an app and then you provide services. But I don't think this would be applicable to Kumotuli, if you know what I mean. It's basically an area where you build the idols, all the gods and goddesses in West Bengal and Kolkata specifically. So you know this is not going to work, right? So the idea is that you kind of try to reflect how we could have modified this, and because the idea is that this COVID-19 is not a single off incident that has happened. These kind of incidents can happen in the future too. So the idea is to understand that what we could have done more. Now, another thing was that we could have created demand. Of course, in Kolkata with Durga Puja and all, the demands were okay. It rose up to certain levels, but in Gujarat there was no Navratri celebrations. Everything was banned. So of course there was a problem with that. Tourism, of course, it took a big hit. And when we talk about tourism, when I talk about Ahmedabad in particular, there is this heritage walk. Of course, it's closed now. It is trying to open up in small staggered manner. But then you cannot, have this idea of digitalizing the entire thing. So that's the problem. Of course, you can dovetail with other promotional schemes, but then there is a problem also. We all experience how it was digitized. Durga Puja was digitized and was shown to all, but I did not personally like the idea of it. Let's add a layer to this. There was a problem of old age homes filling up with people, because people thought that the olders are more susceptible to being infected easily. So they were trying to push the older people to the old age homes. I don't know how is it logical, because older people getting infected easily is not scientifically proven. So anyways, so that's point number one. And second, the idea of pushing older people when they need your support is, I don't know, it does not make any sense to me. So that was another layer to all these existing problems we had at hand. This is my concluding slide of new normal. Vaccine, I don't know. We are working on it. Many vaccines at play. I don't know what will happen. No approved treatment, of course. And then we have moved towards more traditional methods of drinking kara throughout the day. Model-based simulations, of course, it has failed. So what we need to do is we need to reorient our ideas, reorient our thought, reorient our businesses, specifically talking about those smaller ones with traditional crafts and all that. So we have to think about that. We need to adapt, of course, because this is constantly changing, times are evolving, second wave, and then I don't know, third wave also. So we need to innovate and adapt. Self-reliance is very important. We need to look for local and indigenous solutions. And the final thing is that we have to learn, because see, in 1918, previously we had this experience, but probably we did not learn anything. So this time around, we need to learn, because we do not want this to happen again. So what I see is that the idea of coming back, the idea of responding to an event, the idea of being resilient lies basically in the psyche of a community. That is what I call the collective consciousness of a community. So cultural heritage needs to be looked beyond the idea of being a site or a precinct. It needs to be looked at a collective consciousness of a community, the psyche of it, and they are very well aware of how to respond to it. So when you look at it collectively, you understand that they have the ability. It's only that they need to be empowered in certain ways, but it's there. The idea is there. That's about it. Thank you so much. I hope I have been able to answer your question, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Ripal. And you have talked about the local consciousness and resilience, which is to be built locally. And also, I'm thankful because you have related to Kolkata, which I was going to ask you anyway. We'll come back to you, Ripal. And now I go to Mr. Sandeep Virmane. You have been working in different parts of Kutch, Gujarat for many years now. This area has a long history of recurrent earthquakes and droughts, which the communities have survived over years and at the same time managed to retain their cultural identity. Could you please tell us, in your experiences of working in some of these areas, about the indigenous knowledge system of the people, which help them to reconcile with extremities and reconstruct their life after the disaster? Over to Sandeep.
Thank you, Dr. Basu, for having me on this program. I am trying to just find my slide. Shukrit, can I request you to play my slide, please? I seem to be having some problem with the connection.
I will just take a moment. I think we can see your screen, sir.
Just a minute.
We do see your desktop. If your PowerPoint is on, then you can just We can see our
Dr.
slides.
Basu, can you go ahead and talk to Shalini while I try and organize this?
Professor Basu, you are on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Okay.
Screen is visible. We can.
Slide is visible. Yeah.
It's visible, Sandeep. You just put it on the presentation mode. That's all.
Oh, is it?
Or
yeah, is this all right?
Yes, it's fine. You can start, Sandeep.
Okay, fine. So I'll talk to you about one community on the Banni grasslands in Kutch. I will take you through two of their constructs, which will try and throw some ideas on how cultural constructs are being able to help them find resilience in dealing with disasters. You will all remember the 2001 earthquake that we had in Gujarat, which was very big. And Kutch was the center of that earthquake. And after the earthquake, one thing that we realized is that while almost all the typologies of buildings that were being constructed, whether in the cities or in the rural areas, were destroyed badly, the region that is in green called Banni is where they used to traditionally make these circular structures. And this is an area where you have a lot of pastoral communities. It is one of the largest tropical grasslands of Asia. And they have, it's 2,500 square kilometers in area. And these pastoral communities have a very interesting way of living where the Meghwal communities, which is these women here that you can see in this picture, are the Hindu communities who provide services to the pastoral Muslim communities. And so all the artisanal support, whether it be providing leather goods, whether it be providing building services, embroidery work, is all provided by these Meghwal communities to the Muslim communities, and they do all the building activities for the Muslims. So in this beautiful grasslands, what we also have is a situation where we have droughts. We have almost every 5 years, there are 3 years or 2 to 3 years, which are droughts. So they have been able to build a certain understanding on the cyclicity of droughts. While we see it as disasters, they have been able to develop coping mechanisms within their communities on seeing how to live along with droughts. And these communities used to traditionally build these kind of bungas. They are circular structures. And after the earthquake, what happened was that while all the other structures broke down, these circular structures did not. So we spoke to Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority. We called a lot of master artisans who were from the Meghwal community, and they explained to us that it was actually after the 1819 earthquake, which was another very large earthquake in history, which changed the course of the Indus River itself. And during that time, they invented or developed these circular structures. Till then, these communities used to live in square structures. So it is not that cultural and traditional changes happen very gradually. Here it was a very big event which almost immediately started resulting in these circular forms. When we put a lot of structural engineers to start studying why was it that these circular structures did not break, so they have this system of having a large plinth, and as the house expands, they keep adding these circular structures to their plinth and creating these courtyards which are used. They are very colorful people. They are very conscious of their cultural identity and expressions, and they express them very vibrantly. And what we found was that it is the circular structure which, because of the lateral thrust of the earthquakes, in a square structure, the corner becomes very vulnerable. And while one of the walls works like a buttress, the other wall becomes paper thin and actually collapses and then brings the whole roof down. Whereas in a circular structure, the lateral thrusts actually work. This gives an arch action, and the forces of the earthquake travel circularly into the building and then dissipate into the ground. And that is why these bungas did not break in the earthquake. We discussed this with the Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority. It was approved. These were mud structures, and in spite of that, they did not break. This was a major event that took place in the entire evolution of the ways in which GSDMA would work in supporting communities, identify their cultural typologies, understand the science behind their cultural systems, and then sanction it for reconstruction. So the Meghwal community took the responsibility of rebuilding the entire region with these bunga structures. This was a modification that was also done with the help of the Meghwal communities, where they were earlier making thatch structures. Now they started making tile structures. So there was an 8-sided roof that rests on a cylinder. So how would the forces act? That was also calibrated. And then these kind of villages, almost 1,200 such structures came up only within 1 year after the GSDMA sanction that was given to this cultural typology of this region. And ever since then we have gone and studied cultural ways of looking at earthquakes in Kashmir, Uttarakhand, Himachal, Spiti, Bihar, Northeast, and they all have their own methods of having built resilience into their building typologies, and have this has all been documented now. We are hopefully going to put it into a book so that this can now be sanctioned by NDMA as a method of construction. We then went on to bring 12 of these artisans together and design their first resort together. This was an indigenous tourism project where they they became so famous after this earthquake. They wanted to express themselves in much more fancier ways than just a circular structure. And so these 12 artisans got together and we designed what was called Shami Sarad with them. They were all artisans who provide different services to the pastoral communities, and they all came together to bring all their knowledge systems into this resort. It's a well-known resort which has got many awards now, and it is run by the community themselves. They do a business of almost 50 to 60 lakhs every year during the winters. The same community also has, because of these droughts that I spoke to you about, developed a system where they have a water tank like this that you can see, which by the summers, the waters go down into the ground for their buffaloes and cattle. So this is a very interesting process where this is a system called Abhat, which is the owner of a particular well in the tank will invite an Abhat, which is that they will call all the people in the village to come and help them make their well. So here you can see that the tank is there and there are little wells within that. Each well belongs to one particular pastoral community. And they will, because it gets covered with mud, then they call for an Abhat and they all get together. But the one principle that they have built into this entire process of Abhat is that during the year, if you have had any misgivings, if you have had any fights, or you have had any quarrel with any the Abhat, the idea is that by calling that person, you will subsume your own ego and you will ask that person whom otherwise you are having a fight with to please come and help you in building your well. The tradition is that if the person is extremely angry with you, he will refuse. And then you will send the oldest person in your household to go and request him. If he is very angry, he will tell Kaka, please, I am sorry, but I am very angry with this person for what he has done and I will not come. And then the tradition is that you send the youngest girl in your household and request Kaka to please come for the Abhat. They say that his heart melts and he can no longer say no to a young girl coming and requesting him. And he comes and joins the Abhat. And they all get together and help that person make this well. This is a tradition that is still being practiced very widely in their wells, but in also cutting grass or making various other things in the house. this is the trough that is finally made, and the cattle come down to drink this water. They all get together, they cook together, and they eat together. So these are two small stories that I wanted to share with you of how a cultural construct deals with calamities of different natures, where in this case, droughts and earthquakes, and how they are recognized by us today in policy so that, and celebrated so that these customary laws come into the fold of our current policies and frameworks. Thank you. Hello.
Yes, Mr. Virmani. I'm just waiting for Professor Basu to take over.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know. Sandeep, thank you. Thank you for this wonderful narratives. And we'll come back to again how much we can learn from these people. That is wonderful. I will come back to you. We are running a little short of time. So I now ask Shalini. Shalini, so far, climate change has been mainly a concern for the environmentalists, and the ICOMOS generally focused on climate cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible. But with the initiation of the nature culture journey in ICOMOS 19th General Assembly at New Delhi 2017, we saw a convergence emerging, a new perspective of looking at the cultural heritage aligned with climate change and sustainable development goals. ICOMOS India has recently launched a working group on climate change, which you, Shalini, are coordinating. Could you please enlighten us about various activities that this group has initiated, the plans and programs in the context of historic areas? Over to Shalini. Shalini?
Yes, thank you very much, Sangmitra Di. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for giving this opportunity to the Climate Change and Heritage Working Group to put their ideas and thoughts across at this platform. We
have
are
any slide? You have any PPT which you started
Yes.
sharing? Okay.
I have started sharing. Can't you see that?
No.
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, Sandeep has to stop sharing his screen.
Sandeep, please stop sharing your screen because we are seeing your screen. Can you? Okay. I think.
Ma'am, in my case, Shalini ma'am's presentation is visible.
No, I'm not.
No, we can't
I'm
see.
not seeing.
Can't see.
We can't see.
Is it still?
We are seeing Sandeep's screen, so someone.
The thank you screen. Yeah. Yes.
Sandeep, please stop sharing the screen.
Can anyone help in that? Because
yeah, I'm trying to stop it, but it's not happening.
Stop participant sharing is
yeah. There's some glitch here.
On the top of the screen, you can see the stop sharing.
Yes, I did that. I did that. Yeah, now it's visible.
Now, yes. So, Shalini?
Okay.
Shalini, yes. Can you put it in the presentation mode, please? It's visible now. Please put it in the presentation mode.
It is in the presentation mode. Can you see it? Can't be seen?
Yeah, but not in the presentation mode. Anyway, you carry on. It's not in the presentation mode. Maybe there is a time lag, but anyway, we can see your
slideshow mode, please. Yeah, now it is done.
Yes. Shalini, you can start.
Okay. So Climate Change and Heritage Working Group of ICOMOS India is one of the nascent groups that has got formed. This is our alignment with the parent body, this is a ICOMOS is a founding member of the Climate Heritage Network, and CHN. ICOMOS is a secretariat for this organization, CHN. So it is that enables ICOMOS to work for, set up these working groups and work for CHN on various climate leadership programs. So that's the parent body to which ICOMOS International CCHWG group is aligned to, and we are the national representatives for the International Climate Change group. The idea of the group is, our group was actually formed only in January 2020, and this was to actually support and collaborate on the activities of the ICOMOS Climate Change and Heritage Working Group, and present the perspective of this part of the world to the and incorporate it within the mainstream work. These are the three streams of work which were identified by the main working group, and that is what our working group has tried to align with. So since we are not a very, we've just started in January 2020, and then of course pandemic and all that kind of has hampered. We've not really got any physical work to kind of share, but we've brainstormed, we've put across our ideas with each other, and we've kind of so that is what I present today to all of you. So the initial working group agendas, we deliberated on various heritage and climate concerns, and so the team that we have, we are about 26 members right now in the working group, and our aim is to develop an ICOMOS India resolution on climate change and cultural heritage, and develop an ICOMOS India climate change roadmap, which will feed into the larger objectives and framework of ICOMOS Climate Change and Heritage Working Group. And for this, we need to actually also work on the formulation of a white paper or a position paper, which needs to be put together, and members have to come together to work on that. The working group, ICOMOS working group, was divided into 4 thematic teams when they started working, the international working group, and that is something that maybe we can take it forward here in India as well. And the 4 thematic themes were actually mitigation, energy efficiency, adaptation, loss and damage, communication, and research. So these are the thematic areas under which we could also, we also plan to divide our team under these 4 thematic areas and kind of proceed on our work in these areas. And what's happened? It's not moving.
Try the keypad beside number lock. You know, sometimes it gets locked.
Okay. Okay. So, what I've tried to put across as our idea of the working group is certain thoughts that we had, and so these are some pointers that we've taken from certain researches and studies which are already happening in the climate change arena in India. There's a lot of work which is happening, but if India, we want to tackle climate change, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation, it really needs to address several complex intertwined challenges. Though, of course, for the the overwhelming challenges that we have of rapid population growth, overburdened infrastructure, poverty, income equality. So sustainable development and climate change actually are not very prominent on the political agenda in our Indian cities. So that's a point that we have to keep in mind. And though of course in recent years urban activities have grown in cities like New Delhi, Kolkata, Mumbai, Surat, Hyderabad, there are many action plans which have been happening. But certain challenges that we have to keep in mind while, so some of the challenges that loom large actually are, these are the four main challenges which kind of are put together by looking at certain secondary research, which is actually managing the politics of the global climate change policy, reducing India's coal dependency, reforming our climate insensitive agricultural policy, and managing our growth and environment. So balancing the growth and environment. So managing the politics of global climate change policy. India is a signatory to the climate change, all the international frameworks which are there, and it is the fourth largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So there are over the last 250 years, Europe and US have contributed to more of the world's CO2 emissions than India has. But there are these inequalities which lie at the heart of all these climate negotiations, and India is actually managing all that. There is a whole lot of our Indian emissions mainly come from energy production, and India's dependency on coal is what is also that is something the government is trying to wean off, and the government so that and are trying to invest mainly into renewable energy, reforming climate insensitive agricultural policy. We have so much of this talk happening currently with the farmers agitation, and so our significant chunk of India's fiscal resources are directed towards improving a lot of farmers, and for instance the minimum support price combined with helpful electricity, fertilizer subsidies, it encourages farmers to grow water intensive crops such as paddy even in land which is ill suited to do so. So this is partly why, despite widespread water shortages, India is a net exporter of water due to the excess water used in agricultural exports. Taken together, India's agricultural policies aggravate water shortages, encourage crop burning, which are which do not support, which are bad for climate change or climate change mitigation. Keeps getting locked. Okay, so balancing growth and environment. This is where this is the segment under which probably all the development and the economies which are growing are natural resources which are at the expense of our natural resources. And so ultimately climate change is it's a balancing act between the growth and environment, and this is the sector where probably our discourse of cultural heritage has to fit into this. And these three or four challenges which I've identified, and there are a whole lot of these concerns everybody is talked of. We've seen so many good examples today, and there is a whole list of climate concerns which are there, all of us are aware of. The recent ones, where the concerns were raised over the Goa forest projects which were there, these there's so many examples. Actually, there's a whole list which I've not really no point going into that. But India has major impact of cultural heritage on a lot of I know what keeps happening to actually glowing.
It is.
I think Shalini, you can just sum up with the slides.
The point I want to make actually is that there is this gap that is, between the gap between heritage and climate change. So there is a general absence of cultural heritage from the climate discourse. And so while culture and heritage sectors are very important institutions in most communities, they often are not directly engaged in the work of climate action. So we as a ICOMOS group of we would like to try to identify already existing work which is happening by various organizations like you have the category 2 centers of UNESCO, you have Center for Science and Environment, NRDC, NABARD has opened its first ever center for climate change in Southeast Asia, you have Vasudha Foundation. So how can we engage with all these? There is already a lot of work which they have done in the field of climate change, but the discourse with the cultural heritage is missing with that. So how can we bring that? How can we engage with them and bring that about is something that would be on top of our agenda. One of the activities which we will be shortly taking on is something very interesting is there is an organization called GEO. It's a group on earth observations and for climate change and its impact on world heritage cities. So it's a community activity, and our climate change working group has been shortlisted to work on this. And this we are going to work on 2 world heritage cities that we have, which are the 2 nominated World Heritage Cities of Jaipur and Ahmedabad. And so the work we will soon be allotted work that we need to do under the community activity, and which will be. So our roadmap ahead actually is kind of we would like to actually identify and make a culture a repository of idea of all the points that I've written here: negative impacts of climate change on cultural heritage, identify cultural heritage, and various cultural heritage that has and climate change, the negative impact which climate change is having on them, positive potential of cultural heritage to enhance responses to climate change, various regulations and measures which are prevalent within various cities, and also all the relevant climate policies which are there, which to which I think we need to bring across this whole gap which is there about the cultural heritage, which is not being addressed within the policy by the policymakers. So that's the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini. It's so heartening to see that ICOMOS is facilitating and has a roadmap, which is very important, especially in the context of heritage cities and other. I'll just go to we'll come back to you. We are really running short of time. Thank you so much, Shalini. I'll just quickly ask a question to Rohit, our keynote presentation. Though Rohit, you have really talked very extensively about the role and the concerns of the how integration and change in the management plan. But I would like to say briefly, if you can say us, what will be your specific suggestions to integrate the concerns of this resilience to disaster, pandemic, and climate change in the urban planning process of India, especially in the context of urban heritage in historic cities, areas, and precincts. I know you have touched on this, but can you just give us a very few specific suggestions, Rohit?
Thank you very much, Professor Basu. So I want to give 2, 3 points on this as a response. I think the first thing is that uh, I think we have to go away from the kind of more established notion of conservation plan for a historic precinct or an urban area, because in a way, when we try to do that, we somehow try to cut it out from so many other departments and elements that are connected to that. Because, even if it is a conservation area or it's a historic area, there are regular problems of infrastructure, there are problems of regeneration of the sewage, and housing the people, upgradation of their services. So these are common urban issues, and what is really important is that in the urban development plans, heritage concerns should be addressed, and not having a heritage specific plan separated from these always, because what then happens is that either it is not taken into account by the municipality or those who are doing urban development, or it sometimes conflicts with what the planners are proposing in their master plans or documents which foresee the future of the city. So what is really required is to have heritage professionals on the seating table, when all the other departments and sectors are sitting around and talking about solving urban issues, then heritage should be featuring there, and the concerns for heritage have to be reflected there, and the solutions that have to arrive, that have to be decided, have to be taking into account those, which also means that when decisions like widening of roads for improved access for emergency facilities, or let's say, when such important decisions such as what should be the kind of signage to be put in place in historic urban areas for telling where the evacuation routes are or what are the concerns, if heritage professionals and agencies are not on board, then they will take decisions which are going to be actually adversely impacting the heritage. So that's why I always say that I really try to emphasize that one has to bring them on board, and one has to kind of make sure that they are there always to voice the concerns of heritage when decisions are made regarding making historic cities or urban areas safer against disasters and climate change and other kind of risks. That is one point. The other point I wanted to also emphasize is the fact that what we also need to do is to connect the city planning with the wider territorial or regional planning, because cities don't function in isolation. What happens in cities is so much connected to what happens in the fringe areas and what happens in the rural areas, because many times there is so much of interdependency between them. So you also need to, in my view, have a kind of link across scales, across various scales. That's also something very, very important. Otherwise, maybe things will not really function in the way we really want to have them for historic urban. So I think these are the important concerns. As I showed you in my own example, sometimes open spaces are just, if a planner is just looking at those open spaces, they will just mark them as green, and then it can be interpreted in any way, right? It can be interpreted as a park, it can be interpreted as a forest, it can be interpreted as even as an amusement park can be sometimes colored green. So but when you have to overlay what it means in terms of heritage values, the kind of explanation of that green will differ, and that will only come when heritage planner professionals are on the board when the planning decisions are taken. So that is the one of my things that I would like to really emphasize here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rohit. This is a very, very pertinent question and suggestion. Just to tell you that recently when West Bengal government started declaring two cities of Kuch Bihar and Navadvip. So we really told that the government, that is not in West Bengal Heritage Commission who should be responsible. It should be the entire plan which should be integrated with that. And they agreed. And we have been in both cases, it's also integrated with the land use plan. And you're talking about the region. Yes, in Bhubaneswar and Cuttack, we exactly did the same thing. The first the region and then the Cuttack and Bhubaneswar Twin City, and it's good to see that how it is integrated and how even the signage and everything is now planned where the heritage is the board. But what you have suggested that it should become a policy, standard accepted policy, because in each of these cases we had to convince the government that this is required to be done. The government could have not listened to us. So it should become a normal practice that how the region and in plan and heritage should be a part of the development plan. And to your question of this green, which is very important, I remember in Bhubaneswar, even for the old heritage city, the green color, we had a different green color, a different commercial color, different blue color, different red for the heritage city. Otherwise, it's all standardized. So this is a very important, I think ICOMOS should play a role in integrating and keeping it as a policy. I think this is absolutely, absolutely important. Thank you so much, Rohit, and thank you for all the wisdom and the suggestion. I now, yes, Rohit, yes. Can I come to our next question? Very, very quick rounds of question. Ronit, to you. Ronit is talking about the resilience and climate change. If you have any specific example to highlight, you have already done that partly, how shift in the occupational pattern and changing scenarios creates a knowledge stress and disruption of social cohesion. Could you also suggest how integration of traditional knowledge, which you have pointed out, scientific research and awareness program can play an important role towards regeneration and resilience, and also in achieving some of the sustainable development goals? Ronit, very briefly, could you just answer this question?
Thank you, ma'am, for the very interesting question. I'll just take up a case from Kutch, which we are currently working on. We are working on this camels. Maybe many of you would be surprised to hear that camels can swim. There's this Kharai camel breed, which has the ability to swim. And the pastoralist community, which herd this kind of camel in Kutch, they stay along the coastal region. And this camel has been on endangered list because of this climate stress, and as Sandeep Bhai also was sharing in the Bunny part, but also there are two parts of Kutch. One is the Bunny, which is the more greener one, but the other part is which is more dry, semi-arid region. So that part, the camel, there is frequent drought, and also now there are flooding issues, there are cyclones which affect that area, and also this kind of camels need they feed on mangroves. So it's very difficult for the community now to take them to this and for grazing because of the government regulations, because this also is bordering along India, Pakistan, and there are a lot of other conflicting issues. So because of all this hardship, people are now shifting their occupation. Like they were earlier pastoralists, but now they prefer working for, and Gujarat earthquake was again a major shift which brought in development to Kutch. So people have now new options, which is much easier. And because of this shift, possibly the traditional knowledge is getting diluted. And if that keeps on happening, possibly at one point of time, we would see that people are not actually keeping camels, and this whole species will become extinct. So what we are trying to now work, and which Sahajivan, Sandeep Bhai, and also other people in Sahajivan are also working, is, and we are also trying to research that whether these camels, which were a cultural asset, can actually become an economic asset for people, to become an incentive for them to still keep them. So that was one part that we're working. And in doing it, there is also this kind of local narratives where people say that when the camel graze the mangroves grow. But then there are two ways. Like people say, local people say, yes, we know that, but then how do you prove it? So we currently are studying it, and it possibly shows that to a certain extent, the grazing pressure helps the mangroves to grow. But what is that cutoff? So I think most of this belief system need a scientific evidence, and having the scientific evidence tells you that what is that, limiting factor or possibly the threshold to which you can generalize, and beyond it, it is not generalizable. And that helps when it integrate it with the policy, because when you look from the above, it's very difficult to actually perceive such kind of narratives into policy unless there is a scientific evidence. So possibly this might be a good case to answer your question, ma'am.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's very interesting, because everything is changing, and how you're taking care of the occupation and this particular endangered species and putting them and supported with the research, scientific research. I think that's I am sure that you are know a lot of many such cases, which probably we are not able to hear because shortage of time. Thank you so much, Ranit. I'll talk to Sandeep. Um, I will ask you a particular question because you both are working in the same area and you have already told about this Kutch area. Do you have any experience that you'd like to share with us regarding traditional knowledge system, and also suggest any specific ways for dissipation of that through a capacity building? How can you do that through the capacity building, the knowledge system dissipation? Sandeep.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Basu. So we are doing two things. We are running a training program. It's a one-year residential program for building artisans, where boys and girls in the age group of 18 to 25, they come and live with us. And they go through an understanding of not just their traditional occupations as carpenters or as people who make mud buildings, and how they can be applied to urban scenarios. But they also understand the new changing scenario in which their technologies or their knowledge systems are actually becoming more relevant, given climate change, given the problems of the kind of materials that we are using in construction today. Their traditional ways of construction were far more resilient and far more the carbon gas emissions of their systems are far better than what we have been doing. Once they appreciate and understand that, the urban markets is very interesting, that they actually want to do this, want to adopt these systems, but there aren't artisans and architects who are able to deliver on something like this. So over the last 5 years, we have trained almost 1,000 such young people from different traditional communities, focusing on their traditional building types, but they've gone through a change because now they're building also for the cities. So parampara itself, the word itself means change. Actually, it's not trying to hold yourself in param is the now, and the pare is to move away from the now. But you do it incrementally, logically, understanding the meaning of change in the new context without losing the basic principles on which you are wanting to do this. Similarly, like in Banni, we are doing a 6-month training program with the Kutch University, where they are going through a 300-hour training program, again for youth, on decoding the significance and the values of their cultural systems. Very often what tends to happen is that cultural practices continue to happen without, and they tend to lose the scientific basis on which they were based. Or people don't know about why they are doing something that they are doing. They just pose it as a practice. So we have a system where the traditional teachers, that is the older generation of their own community, also come in as teachers. And we have teachers who are coming in from various scientific institutions like ATRI and Ambedkar University and other universities, Kutch University, who are coming in and teaching these children and decoding the scientific basis on which their practices are built. And therefore, they need to be proud of it. And once you are able to build that pride into their knowledge system, then it has a far better chance of sustaining in the long term.
Thank you, Shandip. I think that's a wonderful news. It can really become a role model for other areas. And you have really talked about two very important words. One is conservation is not preservation, but it is a continuity. And other thing is that how you can teach the other people and integrate and not only even in the same profession, same community, how the older generation is teaching and how you're involving. That's I think this is a role model for other areas also too. Thank you. And can I now talk to Ripol? Ripol, you also, like, I mean, we have heard about the capacity building from Sandeep, a wonderful example. So I know that Ripol, you also have are working with the youth for the awareness and risk preparedness for disaster. So can you tell us how you involve the community and how you work with the youth? And as you are from Calcutta, you have already done that. Do you have any specific suggestion what we can do in Calcutta and West Bengal? So your experience of working with youth.
Sure. So I will just talk about the latest project that we did. It was about engaging and documenting community-based disaster risk management practices, and it was being supported by ICOMOS and Swedish Postcode Foundation. So the idea was to integrate cultural heritage into disaster risk management. But when we started working on the project, we thought, why do we want to do this? Because CBDRM, community-based disaster risk management, is obviously an established aspect dimension which has not been talked about. It has been documented well. There are manuals. So what different do we need to do? So we thought that for long, the idea of imposing practices, let it be prevention practices or mitigation practices, have been imposed on communities. But when we look at the communities very closely, we understand that those communities which are already living in hazard-prone areas, they have adopted their own lifestyle, their curious ways of life, which gives us a lot of lessons to learn from. And these stories of communities which are usually relegated as vulnerable communities, their stories needs to be highlighted from the perspective that it's not just about documenting the stories, it's also about showing that those communities which are usually, we think, who are perhaps the academicians, the decision makers, that these are the communities who require our help, are not the ones who actually require our help. So they need to be highlighted in that aspect. And it is also important to show that the capacity to manage risks is very inherent within the psyche of such communities. So these were the 2 points that we wanted to highlight through our initiative. But then we thought that how do we go about it? Do we include experts who are already working in the field? Do we include professionals who have a lot of idea about all this? But then we thought, why not develop a program which is a procedural capacity building process in itself? For example, if we engage youths who are still graduating, who are yet to become graduates, who are still working in different fields, as in they have no idea of how the field is overall, but just getting in touch of it, why not include them and then let them explore these ideas that, see, the communities which you feel are vulnerable, they are more risk literate, they are more risk savvy than you are. These are the things that you need to carry when you become a decision maker in your own life. So not only we get the documentation of these stories that needs to be highlighted, that needs to be brought out in the world, but in this process, we are also training these 16, 17 people, these youth, who eventually will come into some decision-making positions. So this was the journey that we went through for the last 3 months. And interestingly, it was all done within the lockdown. People were working in Assam remotely, and I was here based in Gandhinagar. I was supervising, and the entire team was less than 30 years. So it was an very exciting experience for all of us. And there is a very small 10 minutes documentary on CRRP's YouTube official channel. If you go, you will understand that the change that these people had is tremendous. Their understanding of what cultural heritage is, what disaster risk management is, has completely changed over a period of 3 months. So if 3 months can bring about such a change, imagine what we could have done with more people and these kind of programs being done throughout different places. So if I'm to talk about what we can do possibly in West Bengal and in other areas, probably we should also think about kind of doing these kind of programs, trying to reorienting the youth towards the understanding that you need to be at a position where you understand your own risks. You need to act towards it. You have to be the one who does it. You cannot rely on someone else. And there is another thing that possibly we should also do, that we need to orient them to the idea that it's not always science and technology. It's not always GIS. It's not always many other things. There is a collective consciousness of a community to be resilient. You don't forget that. You have to use that. You have to look into your past and then build a bridge towards the future. So these are the two important things that our youth from Bengal needs to be oriented towards. So I guess, yeah, that would be my suggestions, comments, whatever.
Thank you, Ripal. I mean, this work of capacity building, what Sandeep and you are doing with the youth, that's absolutely, it should be imitated, and we should get inspiration from your work, I think. We are almost coming to the end. We have one or two questions for Shalini, but before that, I would like to just go back quickly to Shumona. Shumona, I think what you have shown is a very extensive work, and I'm sure it has to become a policy decision and a part of the management. Can you just briefly say what type of background studies will be required? Just point out some of the background studies which are required for making such an extensive management plan. Shumona.
Yeah, well, that was a more or less a success story, how the Rath Yatra is running year after year, and it is not in one day it has achieved that kind of system, basically. So in case of West Bengal, actually what I see, we need to do some ground verification for the different types of events which we host. If it is, we have to know the nature of the festival. Say it may be against a closed space, it may be in an open ground like the Posh Mela or the Rash Mela, it may be along a water body like the Ganga Sagar Mela. So for each of them, the approach should be different, but however, it should be going beyond the administrative boundary of that local level. It should go, as Rohit Jigyasu sir also mentioned, that it should be thought at a regional level, and then only you can bring in success. Other is ground verification. What is actually there? How we can utilize the human being? How you can, like through capacity building, the volunteering process, the sense of belongingness into the entire city of Puri, how they actually bring in or rope in the strength of the youth. That is also to be tagged in case of our festivals of within Bengal. We also need to see that, like in the case of
Dr. Gupta, sorry to cut you, but just a list of background study, if you can just say, rather than explaining.
Okay, it should be the scale of the event, the time of the event, particularly the climate, etc., the purpose of the event, like whether it is some act like going and having a holy dip, or viewing something, or doing some, or acting something like the Shravani Mela during in the Tarakeshwar, that also calls in many people. So, and along with it, appropriate surveys, how the people are responding, how the people are feeling about it. Water contamination through water is again another issue. Contamination, the food standardization which is being given. So all these aspects should be coming through the policies, and if they are enforced, then only a well-managed festival can be arranged, basically.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. I think, I mean, your publication and others are available, so one can also refer to that. I think we have some question for Shalini Dasgupta. Shalini Dasgupta, the questions, along with the question, can you also tell us that how ICOMOS working group is facilitating similar other organization who are working? And also you have a few questions from Aditi Rai, that does the group also link the aspects of heritage with the Sustainable Development Goal of 11.4 and other indirectly related targets? As we don't have a specific working group on sustainable development goal. So, and there is also a question about the membership. Can an ICOMOS member can become a part of this working group? So can you combine this question, that how you're facilitating and how they are related to sustainable development goal working of this group, and how ICOMOS member can become a member of the working group? Shalini.
So I'll first take the last question first. Yes, ICOMOS India does not have a sustainable SDG working group, but so ICOMOS has a SDG working group. So if members of ICOMOS India want to put a group together, they can form a group, and that can be facilitated also to form a separate SDG group, because the international ICOMOS has two separate working groups. They have a SDG working group which is separate, and they have a climate change working group which is separate, and there is also they also have a rights based working group, and there is water and heritage working group which is on the verge of becoming an international scientific committee. These are the four working groups which are currently there. In India, we only got ICOMOS India has got 3 working groups. So we've got our 3 scientific working groups besides the emerging professionals working group. So the scientific working groups are SDG does not fall in that, and of course when in climate change, the linkage of whatever SDG goals that can be linked with climate change work, we would definitely look at that. We are still in the formulation stage, so we do not have, maybe in future seminars of this nature we'll be able to present more concrete work that the group would have put across. Besides that, the other question which was asked about facilitating similar organizations. So in 2018, if I remember, that ICOMOS India had been a facilitator for one of these events like this with WII, that is Wildlife Institute of India, Dehradun based, which is a C2C center. Actually, it's a UNESCO C2C center. But we need to actually be facilitators to many more such organizations. We need to actually bring in the dialogue of climate change. At that time, the event was around nature culture journey. It was a workshop on nature culture journey. So we need to actually engage with C2C centers, get their stand on how they respond to climate change impact on world heritage, Indian heritage, natural heritage, all cultural heritage. And also on other organizers, even I think with the Ministry of the Environment and Forest and Climate Change, something that ICOMOS should engage with, and various other organizations, which I, in my presentation, had identified some of those organizations. But there's an endless list of organizations which are doing work in the climate change area. But of course, like I mentioned before, the discourse of cultural heritage is sort of missing with most of them. So we actually need to bring that in their discourse of whatever work that they are doing, how to bridge that gap of cultural resource and climate change studies which are already happening.
Thank you, Shalini. Thank you. I think I have some opinion regarding this Sustainable Development Goal. I think climate and Sustainable Development Goal for the time being can remain together because they are so interrelated later on. And in historic cities of India, everything is so interconnected. I think that, but anyway, probably we can sort out.
Professor Basu, can I pitch in like a sentence or so here?
Yes, please.
Yes. So regarding sustainable development goals, it is very important to look into the aspect of its localization in the particular context. So if that could be addressed on behalf of ICOMOS at any levels, that would be really, it will really bring a change in the way we are looking at localizing SDGs in Indian context, in Indian cities and urban areas. So it was just a suggestion and interest out of which I asked.
No. That's absolutely important that it is such a broader issue. It has to be looked into a specific context and localization. I think ICOMOS should take care of it. I think before I hand over, this has been very interesting. Sorry, I had to cut short of some of the people, but before I hand over it to Shukrit Sen, the coordinator, for summing up, I would also like to mention, because the questions are coming, that whether this presentation will be, yes, the presentation will be available on the Facebook and also probably on the YouTube, so it can be seen later on also, those who haven't seen. It has been a very interesting, enlightening discussion with participation and from all the speaker and the panelists. So, and I now hand over it to Shukrit Sen, for summing up and giving the vote of thanks. Shukrit.
Sangeeta Di, before sorry, I didn't answer one part of the question. Somebody
yes, please.
Members, how can they become members of the group?
Yes, please, sorry.
I think it's open because in for the NSCs we've got that you have to be part of only 2 NSCs, but I think for working groups it is open, and anybody who has interest in joining the working group has to just maybe write an expression of interest to the secretariat, and they can join any of the working groups which are there.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you, Shalini. Thank you. And yes, any other question from anybody? Or I don't see any other question. Aditi, any question?
No, that's all we have.
Okay, thank you. Then Shukrit, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Basu. I think, as you mentioned very rightly, that we had very, very interesting presentations today. And with all these presentations, we really come to a conclusion that there are too many underlying factors, apart from just the natural and the human-induced hazards that we talk about these days, that make historic urban neighborhoods vulnerable in current times. And the role of people from different stratas of the society and the need of a dialogue between them and the policymakers has been highlighted in almost all the presentations today. Another aspect that really came out was the need to have a more inclusive approach and not just stick to heritage buildings. As a matter of fact, other aspects such as urban morphology, festivals, belief systems, traditional knowledge also play a very, very important role, and no such aspect of heritage can really be looked at in isolation. Although today we are discussing on historic precincts in urban areas, the examples from the Sundarbans and Kutch show that we cannot really restrict ourselves, but try to bring into picture a larger landscape at a planning level when discussing disaster risk reductions strategies. And this will help us establish a more holistic approach towards implementing both scientific and traditional knowledge, understand what are the overlapping factors, and help increase capacity within communities to help reduce risks. With this, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our speakers today for shedding light on such very, very, very vital factors that will keep us thinking for the coming few days. I would also like to acknowledge Professor Basu, who's the coordinator for NSC HTV, and Ms. Ananya Bhattacharya, who's the East Zone representative, ICOMOS India, for being so instrumental in organizing the entire webinar series. I would also like to mention Vasudha Aditi, Nandini, and Mitali, who are helping out from the Emerging Professionals Working Group today, and every other EPWG member who has represented and helped us in the entire series. While this is the last webinar of the series, I think we have some great material to reflect on at this moment. And hopefully we should come back with the momentum that we have developed. We should come back with season 2 really soon. I would further like to thank Sujata ma'am for helping us out with everything, the Zoom support, Facebook. And I would also like to, thank the EXCOM, the Executive Committee, for supporting us throughout. With this, I would also like to mention that ICOMOS, every participant out here who would want to become a member of ICOMOS India can apply and be a part of the cause. We have our applications open till the 15th of December. And members who haven't renewed your memberships, please do so. And hope we meet soon again at a beautiful webinar, or maybe in person very, very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, all the participants. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shukri. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.